Howdy folks, it is time, finally, for the big cherry tasting. I've gathered up 8 different varieties of fancy cocktail cherries. We're going to try them out, hopefully come up with preference or at least some information so you can make up your own mind. Let's go. We've got 8 different brands of cherries to try. Some are packed in sugar, some are packed with alcohol, there are different varieties of cherries, different brands with the same variety of cherries. There's a lot of different ways to slice up this group of cherries, but I'm gonna take today to try and explain the 8 different options I have for you. All of these bottles today are gonna be right in between the $20 to $25 range, and that'll get you about a 13 or 14 ounce bottle, which is somewhere like in the high 300 to 400 gram bottle. So they're all kind of roughly the same price, but but not cheap exactly. I'm not gonna talk about super cheap, very gross, bright red maraschino cherries because I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in fun, delicious, fancy cherries. I did a little tasting with my friends Justin and Aaron. Aaron loves cherries, so I thought that would be a fun way to do it. The audio on that didn't come out great, and we were kind of rambling all over the place. So for the sake of brevity, I decided to recap our discoveries here. He said long-windedly. Okay, so the first kind of cherries I got are called Toschi. Okay, now these are the first cherries that I ever got when I was just getting into cocktails. I found these at the fancy Italian market, and I've just been buying them ever since without really examining my cherry choice too much. So I have those. They are Italian. They're Amarena cherries, which is a variety of cherry. This brand, Toschi, started in Vignola, Italy, and they also, once upon a time, made a cherry liqueur as well. That seems to not be a thing anymore.
I'm going to say these are fresher than the ones in our fridge because ours get that little crystallization of cherry sugar.
That's a thing we can discuss. Actually, you don't need to keep these in the fridge.
Oh.
If there's enough sugar in a thing, you can keep it on the shelf. And these will crystallize, the juice will crystallize if you put it in the fridge long enough. So my recommendation,
Just don't put it in the fridge.
keep it on the shelf. We found the Toschi to be very sweet.
Yes, this is straight up candy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For real.
For real. We found these Toschi cherries to be very sweet with a firm texture, but a little bit of like almost a grape or grape juice flavor, which was a little bit odd. Although these are sort of my go-to cherries that I use all the time, so they're pretty good. I want to add here real quick that all of these jars of cherries have some vegetable concentrate or fruit juice concentrate and also citric acid. The vegetable concentrate for color and the citric acid for flavor. It's unclear how much each cherry puts in, but that can account for some of the color differences and some of the flavor differences as well. But it seems putting that into your cocktail cherries is pretty normal. Similar to Toschi are these ones called Fabbri. They're also Italian. Fabbri is a gelato maker and makes these cherries to, go on top of the gelato. Also Amarena cherries, and they also come in this sort of white ceramic jar. I see them often together at the fancy Italian place. Why I bought the Toschi cherries and not the Fabbri cherries when I first started, I have no idea. The Fabbri were also very sweet with a stronger cherry flavor and a nice firm texture. The juice, though, had this very bright ruby red kind of color, which was kind of interesting. Though one thing I will say about them is some of them seem to be quite smashed, like they had crammed more into the bottle than should fit, and the cherries were not round anymore. They were kind of a little bit mangled. That was a little disappointing. That could have been just the one jar that I bought, but that's all I have to go on. So
This is more the candy high that I am looking for, but this one has more of the cherry flavor, as Justin said, and for me, it's really, really redolent of Luden's cough drops.
I didn't get that cough syrup flavor so much, but they did have some more of a cherry flavor, a little bit more sour. Fabbri does not make any kind of liqueur or anything like that. But speaking of liqueur, next up is Luxardo. Now, Luxardo, you'll of course know from Luxardo maraschino liqueur. Maraschinos are made with Maraska cherries. The name maraschino comes from the name of the cherry, Maraska. These are the same cherries that are used in the liqueur, but these are packed in syrup, not packed in the liqueur at all. The Luxardo cherries were very dark, pretty firm texture, and sort of a dark, clear syrup. They're a little bigger than Amarena cherries, and these Luxardo ones had a sort of spiciness to them, almost like a clove or cinnamon almost. Just like sort of a hint of another flavor in there. Not sure where that comes from. And they're a little less sweet than the Amarenas as well. Similar to the Luxardo is a brand called Maraska. Now, Maraska also make a maraschino liqueur. You might have seen that when I did a comparison between the two maraschino liqueurs. They're from Croatia, and yes, they've named their company Maraska after the cherry that they're making their cherry liqueur and maraschino cherries with. These were a little bit harder to find, but I found a place online that was selling them. They're actually a little bit cheaper, only about $20. The Maraska cherries are thick, plump, glossy cherries, very, very dark, almost black. I thought they looked really good, very plump, shiny, glossy black, very, very nice. Similar in size and sweetness to the Luxardo without that slightly spicy flavor. So it had a very pleasant texture and sort of a little bit of an earthy flavor, some nice solid cherry flavor. The syrup was sort of opaque, sort of cloudy syrup, which we didn't see in the other cherries.
There's a movie Blood, right?
Uh-huh.
Definitely.
Now on to a third variety of cherries. We have these cherries called Bada Bing cherries. Now they're using Bing cherries from Oregon, which are a tart kind of cherry. I've heard good things about these cherries. I have never tried them. These Bada Bing cherries were big, like really big. And most of them had stems still attached, which I don't love like in a cocktail context just because you have to do something with the stem and it's kind of gross and weird at the end of your drink.
Should we eat the stems?
So if you want stems on your cherries, then, go for it. In terms of flavor, I found these to be like very bland. The syrup is very thin, not enough sugar in them, I would say. And like the flavor was like, I don't know, kind of dry, kind of cardboardy almost. Like I'm not in love with these. And like all these cherries, they're pitted, but these had like pretty big holes where the pits were shoved out of the cherry. I don't know, didn't look great. They also have sort of a even more intense sort of grape juicy flavor. Not my favorite. So moving on is another brand packed with alcohol. These are Woodford Reserve cherries. Couldn't find any information about what kind of cherry they're using. I think the point of these isn't the cherries, but the bourbon they're packed in. There's a few different brands of cherries that are made by whiskey companies. I think I saw Maker's Mark cherries somewhere. These Woodford ones are going to stand in for those because I have a feeling that it's just the same cherries relabeled. Don't quote me on that, but one whiskey brand kind of cherries is probably the same as the rest. Now the Woodford cherries, I'm not sure what kind of cherry they are, but they might be Bing cherries because they were also really big and they had huge holes where the pits came out.
Looks like a bullet hole or something.
They had kind of a runny syrup, but not a terrible cherry flavor, like kind of a pretty good cherry flavor. They had a pretty good cherry flavor, but almost no bourbon flavor. In fact, if you look on the ingredients list, bourbon is way down the list, past vegetable concentrate and just above citric acid. So, there's not a lot of bourbon in these, and they taste nothing. They don't taste like bourbon at all.
They let the bourbon near it.
Yeah, they whispered bourbon in its ear. Just unlike these for the cherry flavor, I thought they were kind of dull. I sent him home with this bottle of cherries for his trouble. Next up, we have yet another variety of cherry. Griottines are French, and they're made with Morello cherries. Griottine?
Griottine.
They go to the Balkans to get their cherries, and they pick them fresh, and they pack them in kirsch, which is, of course, cherry eau de vie. They pack them in cherries and syrup and bottle them in France, and they should be very fancy. Again, haven't tried these yet. They're sort of petite, little tiny cherries with a sort of like almost iridescent sort of bright red color. Not dark like the Maraskas at all, and they're like just perfect little spheres. I guess that's Morello cherries for you. These had a very strong Kirsch flavor.
Whoa. Mamma mia.
Whoa, yeah. Okay, yeah.
These are
These are much more alcoholic. These are way more alcoholic. I'm not sure how these would do generally in cocktails. They have a very strong Kirsch flavor. Maybe if it was a drink that already had Kirsch in it or some other cherry element, maybe these would do well, but very strongly of Kirsch. Now, finally, I've got another kind of cherry that was a little bit more difficult for me to get. These are St. Agrestis cherries, and they're actually packed in St. Agrestis Amaro. You've seen me talk about St. Agrestis Amaro before on the channel. It's a really delicious Amaro from Brooklyn. For some reason, I tried to order these from the St. Agrestis website. They wouldn't ship it to Oregon. I couldn't get them on Amazon. I couldn't find anyone to ship these to me in Oregon until I talked to my good friend Joel. Joel has a YouTube channel called Through the Mixing Glass. It's a really good channel full of fun information, fun experiments. He's been a little quiet of late, but go over to his channel, subscribe, tell him to get back to making videos, please. He compiled a little review of these himself. Let's listen to see what he had to say.
Hey Pete, and hello to all of you watching. My name is Joel. It's nice to meet you. So we're talking about the St. Agrestis Amaro cherries. And right off the bat, I want to say I really like these cherries, but they are very different than the standard Luxardo cocktail cherries. The big difference, of course, being that they are soaked in an Amaro. So they're going to bring a ton of flavor to the cocktails that you guys use them in. I like to think of them as little Amaro flavor bombs for your cocktails. And there's going to be some cocktails where they work great. A Manhattan, for instance, the Amaro goes really, really well with whiskey and vermouth. Goes great in an old fashioned. I've had some really good whiskey sours with them as well. But I think there's probably some drinks out there where that Amaro flavor is not going to be what you want to add to your drink. So you wouldn't, in that case, be able to add a cherry if this is all you have. So don't think of them as a direct one-to-one replacement for the Luxardo cherries. They're very good, but they're very different. The texture is very, very different as well. I love the candied, chewy texture of the Luxardo cherries. These are different. They're much more fresher, they're juicier, they're not as they're just a little bit more natural feeling to me than the Luxardo cherries. So that's something to know as well. I also think the price is really good for these. This is a big jar and it is packed to the brim with cherries for $25. The Luxardo is about that. I've seen Luxardo for more too. I've seen Luxardo going for $35 a jar. So the price is good. You get a lot for your money here. So yeah, definitely recommend the St. Agrestis cherries. I think you'll really like them, but don't go into it expecting that you can use them as a replacement for Luxardo cherries. They're very different. So with that said, I will send it back over to Pete.
Thanks, Joel. That was very well said. These are unique, nothing like the other cherries we tried. The St. Agrestis Amaro is pretty bitter, very minty, very eucalyptus, sort of reminiscent of Fernet, and these cherries taste strongly of the Amaro. Pretty wild. I'm not even sure if they added sugar to this at all. It might be just the Amaro. And these tasted very bitter, especially after all the sweet cherries we had just tried. These are really fun, but as Joel said, not really a replacement for your more standard cocktail cherry. Also, I'd like to add that these St. Agrestis cherries were kind of shriveled up. They were a little like puckered a little bit. They didn't have that plump, luscious look of some of the other cherries.
They look a little desiccated.
They're a little
Dry.
wrinkled,
Yeah.
sort of.
Not
Like-
desiccated. They just look a little bit
a bit mashed.
like raisined.
Conclusions. The first 4 jars of cherries we tried are your sort of classic cherries that you might use for cocktails. If you're only going to get 1 jar of cherries, I would suggest you get one of these 4. Toschi, Fabbri, Luxardo, or Maraska. Toschi was Erin's favorite, but she loves sweet things. They're very, very sweet, like delicious. Erin could eat them all day. I could maybe have 1 or 2 before her, I'm sweetened out. I personally like the Maraska cherries, so beautiful, glossy and plump, and sweet. Still very sweet, but not nearly as sweet. The cherries themselves seemed a little bit tartar, I thought those were a great option. Justin preferred the Woodford, which I didn't like the look of. They're pretty big and have those big holes, but they do have sort of more of a cherry flavor. It's like less about the sugar, more about the cherry, so they're not a terrible option. Ton and the St. Agrestis are outliers, tasting very much of what they're packed in, Kirsch or Amaro, respectively. Pretty interesting, pretty fun, but not really what you want for your everyday cherry. And finally, those Bada Bings, I was not into. They had sort of a weird dusty flavor. They were huge, which I did not like, and they had big holes like the Woodford ones, so those I don't recommend. Anyway, let me say this one last thing. I ate a lot of cherries that day, and that gave me a stomachache, so you're welcome. All right, that's all I've got for this cherry roundup. Don't forget to leave positive feedback. Send me your nature footage if you have any. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. We will see you next time.